Imagine living next door to a monster. A man who smiles at you in the morning, waves as he mows his lawn, and invites you over for a barbecue. A man who seems normal. But behind closed doors, in the shadows of his unassuming home, he's hiding a secret so dark, so horrifying, it defies comprehension. In the quiet town of Riverside, nestled in the heart of the Midwest, there was a house, 4507 Maple Lane. To the neighbors, it was just another home on the block. But to the police who raided it on a cold March evening in 2015, it was a house of nightmares. When officers arrived, they were hit with a smell so foul, so overpowering, it made their stomachs turn. They thought it was a dead animal, maybe a raccoon trapped in the walls. But as they stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, they realized the truth. This wasn't just a house. It was a graveyard. Plastic bags stuffed with human remains. Bodies hidden under floorboards. Decomposing victims left to rot in the basement. And the man responsible? Marcus Holloway, a seemingly ordinary neighbor who had been living among them, unnoticed, for years. But here's the most chilling part. Holloway didn't just kill. He did it in plain sight. In a bustling neighborhood, surrounded by families, children playing in the streets, and neighbors chatting over fences. How could something so evil happen right under their noses? This is the story of Marcus Holloway's House of Horrors. A story of betrayal, of lives lost, and of a community forever scarred by the monster in their midst. Before we dive into the darkness, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because what you're about to hear will stay with you long after the video ends. Riverside was the kind of town where everyone knew each other. A place where kids rode their bikes down tree-lined streets, and neighbors waved hello from their porches. It was peaceful, predictable, and safe, or so they thought. But in the spring of 2015, something shifted. A strange, sickening smell began to waft through the Oakwood neighborhood. At first, it was faint, almost unnoticeable. People shrugged it off, blaming it on a nearby landfill, or maybe a dead animal stuck in the sewer. But as the weeks passed, the stench grew stronger, more oppressive. It clung to the air, seeping into homes, clinging to clothes, and invading dreams. Residents tried everything to mask it, lighting candles, spraying air fresheners, keeping their windows shut tight. But nothing worked. The smell was relentless, a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. And then the whispers began. Around the same time, at least 8 women from the area vanished without a trace. They were women who lived on the fringes of society, struggling with homelessness, battling addiction, or simply living alone. Their disappearances didn't make headlines. No search parties were organized. To many, they were invisible, their lives deemed unimportant. Local authorities dismissed the cases, assuming the women had simply moved on or fallen back into old habits. But the families who loved them knew better. They knew something sinister was at play. Then, on the evening of March 28, 2015, everything changed. A single phone call shattered the illusion of safety, exposing the darkness that had been lurking in Riverside all along. That evening, the Riverside Police Department received a call that would change everything. It was from a woman, her voice trembling, her words barely coherent. She was bruised, battered, and fighting to stay alive. She had just escaped from 4507 Maple Lane, the home of Marcus Holloway. She told the police that Holloway had held her captive, that he had tried to kill her. Her words were frantic, desperate, and filled with a raw terror that sent chills down the spines of everyone who heard her. This wasn't just a call for help. It was a cry for survival. Within minutes, law enforcement was on the move. The house on Maple Lane, a weathered 2-story home with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs, had always blended into the background. To the neighbors, it was just another house on the block. But to the woman who had escaped, it was a prison, a place of unspeakable horrors. Marcus Holloway was a mystery to those who lived around him. Quiet, reclusive, and always keeping to himself. He was the kind of neighbor who faded into the background. His house was perpetually dark, the windows shrouded by thick curtains that never let in the light. Occasionally, strange noises would echo from inside, screams, thuds, the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. But in Oakwood, people didn't ask questions. They minded their own business, turning a blind eye to the signs that something was terribly wrong. Little did they know, the darkness inside that house was far worse than anything they could have imagined. When the police arrived at 4507 Maple Lane, armed with a search warrant, they thought they were prepared for the worst. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to find. As soon as the door creaked open, an overwhelming stench hit them like a wall, a nauseating mix of decay, filth, and death. One officer immediately recoiled, gagging, his hand flying to his mouth as he stumbled back. The smell was unbearable, a visceral assault on the senses that left no doubt. Something horrific had happened here. Inside, the house was a chaotic nightmare. Trash was piled high, empty bottles and old clothes scattered across the floors. The air was thick with the stench of rot, and every step seemed to sink into the grime that coated the ground. But this was only the beginning. In the basement, officers found stacks of black garbage bags, some torn open by rats. What spilled out was unthinkable. Human remains, partially decomposed, hidden away like discarded trash. The sight was enough to make even the most seasoned officers freeze in horror. Upstairs in the bedroom, the scene was even more gruesome. A decomposing body lay on the floor, its skin darkened, its eyes wide open as if frozen in terror. Another victim was wrapped tightly in plastic, left to rot in the corner of the room. The room was a macabre tableau, a chilling reminder of the evil that had taken place within these walls. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was a graveyard, a house of horrors hidden in plain sight, in the heart of a quiet neighborhood. And as the officers processed the scene, one question echoed in their minds. How could this have happened right under their noses? Marcus Holloway was no ordinary criminal. His story wasn't one of impulsive violence or chaotic outbursts. It was far more calculated, far more sinister. Born in 1970, Holloway had once served in the military, but his time there ended in a dishonorable discharge. The details of his downfall remain murky, but it was clear that something inside him had shifted. By 2010, he had moved into the house on Maple Lane, a property he inherited from a relative. To outsiders, it seemed like a fresh start, but for Holloway, it was the beginning of something much darker. Over the years, he had several run-ins with the law, including a prior conviction for assault. Each time, he managed to slip through the cracks, evading serious scrutiny. Red flags were ignored, warnings dismissed. And so, Holloway continued to operate in the shadows, his crimes growing bolder with each passing year. His methods were chillingly methodical. He didn't act on impulse. He planned. He watched. He waited. Holloway targeted the most vulnerable, women who were struggling, who had nowhere to turn. He lured them with promises of money, food, or shelter, preying on their desperation. Some victims saw through his facade and escaped, reporting him to the police. But their claims were brushed aside, their voices silenced by a system that failed to protect them. Others weren't so lucky. For those women, Maple Lane became a prison, a place where hope went to die. And as Holloway's crimes went unchecked, the question remains, how many lives could have been saved if someone had just listened? After the raid on Maple Lane, Marcus Holloway vanished. The discovery of the horrors inside his home sent shockwaves through Riverside, and the realization that the killer was still at large plunged the town into fear. For 3 days, the community lived on edge. Parents kept their children indoors, neighbors locked their doors, and the streets, once bustling with life, fell eerily silent. The manhunt for Holloway was massive. Police combed through every corner of the town, following leads and chasing shadows. Then, on April 1, 2015, A break in the case came from an unlikely source. A local diner employee spotted a man matching Holloway's description lurking near the edge of town. Within minutes, law enforcement descended on the scene. When officers confronted him, Holloway remained eerily calm. He denied his identity, his voice steady, his demeanor almost indifferent. But his lies couldn't withstand the cold, hard truth of fingerprint evidence. As the cuffs clicked into place, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The monster had been caught, but the nightmare was far from over. The trial that followed was a harrowing ordeal. Families of the victims packed the courtroom, their grief and anger palpable. Holloway showed no remorse, his cold, detached demeanor sending chills through everyone present. The evidence against him was overwhelming: multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and abuse of corpses. When the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in emotion. Holloway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many, it was a moment of closure. But for others, the scars left by his crimes would never fully heal. The case of Marcus Holloway left an indelible mark on Riverside. Long after the trial ended and the headlines faded, the town was left grappling with painful questions. How had a monster like Holloway operated undetected for so long? How had so many red flags been ignored? The victims, often marginalized and forgotten in life, became symbols of the community's failures and death. They were women who had fallen through the cracks, women whose disappearances were dismissed, whose cries for help went unheard. Their stories forced Riverside to confront uncomfortable truths about who society chooses to protect and who it leaves behind. In the aftermath, the house on Maple Lane was demolished. Bulldozers reduced it to rubble, erasing the physical reminder of the horrors that had taken place within its walls. But for many, the demolition felt symbolic, a desperate attempt to bury the past, to move on. Yet, the questions remain. How many more victims were there? How many lives could have been saved if authorities had acted sooner? These unanswered questions linger like a shadow over Riverside, a constant reminder of the cost of indifference. The story of Marcus Holloway is not just about one man's evil. It's about the systems that failed, the voices that were silenced, and the lives that were lost. And as the town continues to heal, one thing is clear: the scars of this tragedy will never fully fade. Thank you for joining us for this chilling story. If you found this video compelling, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more true crime cases. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think could have been done differently to prevent this tragedy?